I thank you for joining us again. This is the recut of the class that happened Saturday. We had some technical issues, putting it mildly, and it comes with the territory. We're learning and growing, and sometimes these things happen. When we last got together, we were talking about the Four Noble Truths. We covered 1 through 3. And we talked about the 3 poisons, which is ignorance, aversion, and attachment, and their various relatives. And then we talked about impermanence, dualistic thinking, karmic predisposition, and interdependence. And we talked about ignorance being, the key to all of the problems. Basically, because if we weren't ignorant and we knew better, we wouldn't have this type of mess. And we're going to find out, that's going to kind of be a theme in this discussion too, except it's not going to be ignorance. There's going to be something with the Eightfold Path, which is the Fourth Noble Truth. Before we start, I want to talk with you about your practice, and this is important, I think. The term ignorance is bliss. There's a great deal of truth to that. If you do something and you know it's wrong, the karmic consequences are greater than if you did something and you didn't know it was wrong. There's still some consequences, but it's much greater if you know better. And what happens with Buddhism is you're going to start to learn things. And that knowledge comes, and the wisdom comes some responsibility. And people need to be aware of that. When you find out truth, and it resonates with you, then you have to try your best to live to that truth. And the Dharma is very much like an onion. You can peel it, and you think you know something, you'll find there's a little bit more you can know. And as those layers of Dharma become, going down lower layers, that's because you're becoming more and more of an enlightened being. And as this develops, a lot of things will change in your life, especially when we talk about the 5 precepts, but to some degree the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, because you're going to start to look at things in a different way. So it's something to kind of be excited about, because at least you know that Dharma is not stagnant. Remember, nothing is permanent, even Dharma. So when the Buddha gave the first 3 truths, the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, and you don't have to suffer, the Fourth Noble Truth is the key to ending the suffering. And what the Buddha said was, all experience is preceded by mind. Led by mind, made by mind, speak or act with corrupted mind, and suffering follows. As the wagon wheel follows the hoof of the ox, all experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a peaceful mind, and happiness follows, like a never departing shadow. So he's giving you the upside of mind. If it's corrupted, suffering follows. If it is peaceful, happiness follows. And that was his introduction to the Fourth Noble Truth, which is the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path is very interesting because there are, let's see if I can do this pointer. You have these 2 that are the wisdom parts, these are the ethical parts, and these are the mental parts of the Eightfold Path. And they all work together synergistically. They might be into 3 different sets, but these are the answer to the 3 poisons and the defilements that we talked about. And the first one that is important is the number 1 is right view. Now, much like we talked about ignorance being the seed of all the poisons and problems, basically right view, if you have right view, you're not going to have many problems either, because what is right view? The Buddha was asked this question, and these are the 2 wisdom parts. He was asked, what is right view? And his response was, knowledge with reference to suffering, knowledge with reference to the origination of suffering, knowledge with reference to the cessation of suffering, knowledge with reference to the way of practice leading to the cessation of suffering. This is called right view. And what he's basically telling you here is that this is the answer right here to the three poisons. If you have the right view and you know the truth of things, then you're not going to have as many problems. You understand karma, you don't have as many problems with karma. You understand that nothing is permanent, so you can adjust your way of thinking when something does stop or ends. It's part of life. So if you have the right view, that keeps you focused. And that's why he started out with this, because with right view, everything else falls into place. The second is right intention. And it was also called resolve. So what is right intention or right resolve? And the Buddha said, being resolved on renunciation, on freedom from ill will, on harmlessness, this is called right resolve. And the better way, not the better way, but how I like to look at this is what he's talking about is that you are going to renunciate, and a lot of people, when they hear that, they think they have to give up something physical like monks do with otherworldly possessions. But what he's saying is that you should resolve to renunciate the things that cause you grief in life. And that is basically what right intention is. The other thing that I think is important as far as right intention is it comes back to the one thing that I think is worth repeating over and over and over again, and that is in how much motivation, what is your motivation plays in Dharma. I mean, motivation is the first step in karmic creation. Why are you doing what you're doing? What motivates you to do that? And with right intention, that teaches you which is the right thing to be resolved and resilient with. And those are the two wisdom aspects of the Eightfold Path. Now, the ethical part, it's a little bit interesting too. And pay attention, because the Buddha is going to talk about right speech. And in the Five Precepts, we're going to talk about that too. I don't think I mentioned that this is going to cover the Refuge Prayer and the Five Precepts. It's a little interesting for me to be doing this in front of just the computer, not in front of you. But right speech. And what is right speech? Abstaining from lying, from divisive speech, from abusive speech, and from idle chatter. This is called right speech. It's pretty explanatory there. And motivation again. Thoughts have karmic consequences too. And I don't like to think that everything is karmic consequences, but basically everything does. And what you say has karmic consequences. And there again, if you just look at what your motivation is for saying certain things, that can stop you from having a lot of problems. I think that a lot of times it's very easy to chatter about things. You see something on Facebook is basically, let's just chatter. Let's give our opinion, let's just chatter. And I mean, I spend entirely too much time there myself. But, that's a form of idle chatter. Abstaining from lying is a given. But abusive and divisive speech, I think that one that a lot of us have problems with is we can say something, and it might be true to say, but it causes divisiveness. And when we talk later on about skillful means, you need to learn how to be able to say truth without having it be divisive. This is one thing about all, with Buddhism. It all requires you to do a little thinking. We talked about, how you have to expect that, a few things, there's more responsibility, and, this is a very good place to start with right speech. And then the next is right action. And what is right action? Abstaining from taking life, from stealing, from illicit sex or sexual misconduct. He's basically outlining the 5 precepts, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. Those are the 5 things that when you do refuge, you agree to train your mind to. So we'll be talking about that momentarily. The next and the final of the ethical is right livelihood. And what is right livelihood? There is the case where a disciple of the noble ones, having abandoned dishonest livelihood, keeps his life going with right livelihood. This is called right livelihood. And this has been the general idea of livelihood for many, many centuries now, is that Buddhists don't want to be involved in any type of weapons. We don't want to be selling weapons, making weapons, anything like that. That's something we should not do. Business and human trafficking, slave trading, prostitution, any of that type of stuff, that's not a good thing to be doing. There's a lot of talk about meat, and we will at some point in time talk a little bit more. You know, it's good to be a vegetarian, but you don't have to be a vegetarian to be a Buddhist. But even if you are not a vegetarian, you don't want to be the one raising anything you're going to eat, you know, that you're going to have to kill to eat. You don't want to have any type of food that somebody has killed especially just for you. That's not a real good thing. And so what they talk about meat is being in the business of killing animals for human consumption, or, you know, it'd be just as bad as killing for fun. Business in making intoxicants. It's probably not the greatest idea to be a bartender or to, you know, run a liquor company or a bar. And the final thing is not to be involved in making or distributing or having anything to do with poisons. Now, it's important to realize that somebody's going to have to be doing, you know, a lot of these things. I mean, it's not that all weapons are bad. It's just that Dharma practitioners need to stay away from that. And, you know, as we talked about, that there are things as your practice develops more, a lot of the way you view things is going to develop. I know a friend that he was very good. He was very good and very successful as a bartender. And he developed his practice, and, you know, it was something that he thought about. It's not, these are not commandments. You know, you're not going to get thrown out of the Dharma if you break a rule, because, you know, this is not what it's about. It's about giving you ideas and ideals to try to live by. And nobody's going to ever get them completely perfect. But as his practice developed, he realized that tending bar just wasn't going to work for him anymore. And much to the chagrin of the bar owner, he quit. And he's, you know, very happy that he did that. And again, it's just as your practice evolves, you know, you're going to evolve. Myself, I tried the vegetarian bit for a while, and I got sick, but I tried it again. And this time, I'm not having any problems, and I feel much better that I don't eat meat. But it's, you know, that's up to you. You need to know, you make the decisions what is right for you at the right time in the right place. So, I mean, after the ethical, we're going to get to concentration. These are the 3, and we do have a typo here. Forget right effort, what you see there on the screen. And what is right effort? He generates desire, endeavors, activates persistence, upholds and exerts his intention for the sake of the abandonment of evil, unskillful qualities that have arisen, never give up. That's the word from the Dalai Lama. His Holiness is really adamant when he gives a Dharma talk, a teaching, or just a public talk, to really suggest to people to never give up. And it's very important to have effort and to be persistent in being mindful, which is next, but to be thinking about what you have to do and putting in the effort to do it. You know, to be a Dharma practitioner is going to require some time and some effort. You know, if you are a tantric practitioner, it's going to take there's commitments you have to make. And it's, we know that life is going to be difficult at times, but we continue to practice. We continue to, put the right effort in, and we make the effort to give up things that cause us grief. But I think it's really important to reiterate that, no matter how tough things get, the bad isn't permanent. The good isn't permanent, but the bad isn't either. And sometimes it takes a lot of effort and resolve to overcome certain situations. But, you have the ability to do so, and just put in the right effort. The next of these three is right mindfulness. And what is right mindfulness? He remains focused on feelings in and of themselves, ardent, aware, mindful, putting away greed and distress with reference to the world. Again, what we are really talking about here is motivation again, and to slow things down. And you hear the word mindfulness all the time. And you won't go to a Dharma talk where you won't hear mindfulness. And what it is it's paying attention. You're persistent about things and you pay attention. When you're mindful of something, that's the only thing you focus on. That's why when we have been doing the single focus meditation, it's to really start to hone in and being mindful. I recall a time when I was where my teacher was, and I was eating and I was reading the newspaper, and he was really ticked off. You don't do that. When you eat, you eat. You don't read the newspaper. You pay attention to what you're doing right in the here and now. Being mindful is the key to staying in the moment. It does take sometimes a bit of diligence to be right in the moment and to stay there. It's easy to wander off. A lot of times when we're supposed to be paying attention to something, you just think about how distracted you can easily get. So mindfulness is very important. And the final one is right meditation or concentration. The Buddha was asked, what is right concentration? By giving up of bliss and suffering, by the disappearances already of joy and sorrow, he attains to and abides in the fourth jhana, which is neither suffering nor bliss, and which is the purity of equanimity, mindfulness. This is called right concentration. We've got a little bit more about the mindful here, but what's important to realize about this final part of the path is that you understand that being attached or adverse is never really going to get you anywhere. And the attachments can sometimes be fun. They're the more pleasant types of things. And it doesn't mean that you don't, you can't have fun. But in truth, you want to stay where you are not attached, you're not adverse, you are. You're right in the moment, not attached, not adverse. And when you meditate, what you're doing is you're giving up the attachments and the aversions and wiping the veil of ignorance away. Meditation, whether we like it or not, is a very big part of Dharma. Some sects and traditions really, really emphasize meditation, especially Zen. Some, traditions don't pay much attention to it. But the basic reason of meditation is to learn to meditate right and to concentrate right. So that's the Eightfold Path. And it's the answer to your problems. It seems very simplistic until you start to implement it. And we're going to jump into refuge. I do want to make one more comment about this mind meditation or concentration, because we talked about it in the first class, but it's worth repeating again. The mind is to be kept at the level of bare attention when you meditate. And detached observation of what is happening within and around us in the present moment. In the practice of right mindfulness, the mind is trained to remain in the present, open, quiet, and alert. Contemplating the present event, all judgments and interpretations have to be suspended, or if they occur, registered and dropped. it's really important if you are starting to, meditate with single focus. Don't, thoughts come in, let them go. And this is what's being talked about here again. So when we talk about refuge, it doesn't seem like it fits in this conversation, but it brings into the Five Precepts, which is a great deal similar in many ways to the Eightfold Path. When you decide to become a Buddhist, let's say officially, you can be a Buddhist practitioner and not have to go through this, but serious practitioners are going to find a teacher or a guru, and they are going to, and it needs to be a fully qualified. You don't take refuge from me. I'm not a fully qualified guru or teacher. You find somebody that has, done the retreats that are necessary, and they can track their lineage themselves. They can track all the way back to the Buddha. That's who you need to find to you take refuge. And they're going to give you the prayer. It's a variant of this one that, excuse me, I take refuge until enlightenment in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And you'll be asked to say this prayer 3 to 6 times a day. And what you can remember is, the 3 things that they talk about. They're called the 3 jewels. You're taking refuge in the 3 jewels, and the jewels are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And the Buddha is obviously, the Buddha, but you need to look at your guru, or your teacher, the ones that can trace their lineage all the way to the Buddha. You need to look at them as the Buddha. It's been said that if you look at your teacher as the Buddha, you will get the blessings of the Buddha. If you look at your teacher as a high teacher, you'll get blessings from a high teacher. If you think of your teacher as a friend, you're only going to get the blessings from your friend. You need to look at the teacher and the guru as the Buddha. Are they going to be perfect? No. But it's not your position to judge the teacher. You're to follow the instructions. I mean, there's a case if there comes a point in time that you have a big disagreement, or there's some ethical thing you're concerned about, you leave the teacher, and that's the end of it. You don't discuss it. You just find somebody else that you can be your teacher. The Dharma is obviously the teachings, and it's the literal teachings. But if you are involved in certain sects and traditions, you're going to be focusing on specific teachings. If you're a Theravada practitioner, you're going to be looking at the Pali Canon. If you are a Tantric practitioner, you're going to be looking at the Tantras and the Tibetan Canon. If you are a Zen practitioner, you're going to follow certain things and meditate a lot, but that's the teaching. And you'll have a certain teaching for whichever sect or tradition you choose to be a part of. The Sangha is fellow Buddhists, and it's monastics. Originally, when the Sangha came about, in the time of the Buddha, only the monks, the monastics, could be in the Sangha. But after the Sixth Council, when the Theravada and the Mahayana split, everybody could be in the Sangha. If you were somebody that took refuge, you could be in the Sangha as well as the monastics. And that's, what you have for the Sangha is the fellow Buddhists and the monastics. And what's important about this is that you understand that you take refuge in these things, and you don't do it out of blind faith. And there's a difference between faith versus what the Buddhists call faith is saddha. A lot of times, if you're looking at certain religions, you are told to have faith. You can't prove something. You have to just have faith in it. Buddha was the total opposite. The Buddha was very, very clear about never believe anything I just say. You need to investigate it yourself. And but if you investigate what Buddha teaches you, you're going to find that it works. Thus, you have faith in it. So what Saddha means is that you develop faith from experience of your own investigation. And that's the way you need to look at faith in the Buddhist term, because you're not expected just to have blind faith or just believe in anything. You have a responsibility to investigate it. It's like when you have a responsibility to pick your teacher. You know, you don't just pick the first person necessarily. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But these are things you've got to, once again, think about. Buddhism requires people to think. This is not, you know, a paint-by-number outfit here. And it's important, in my opinion, of how you look at the three jewels. You know, it's similar to what President Kennedy was talking about, not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And I think that really can work well and help you really have a rich and fulfilling practice. Is you look at, you know, what can I do for the teacher? You know, what can I, and if it's an offering, but I mean, what can I do for the teacher? You know, can I help him with something? I mean, I was very excited when my teacher said, you know, would you help me move? I think that, you know, helping my guru move is a wonderful thing. You know, do what you can do for the teacher. And then, you know, what can you do with Dharma? And the thing about it is that in some of the sutras and prayers that people, different sects and traditions say, it's very specific that you have a responsibility to share Dharma with people that want you to share Dharma with them. You're not supposed to go stand on the street corner and, you know, convert. That's not what Buddhists do. There's one or two traditions that have some sort of conversion ideas, but vast majority no. But if there are people, you know, you can show them things. You can point them in certain directions. You need to share Dharma with those that have a sincere interest in Dharma. And that's what you can do for Dharma. And then what can you do for the Sangha? You know, the Sangha is the community that you belong to. And it's like in any community. You can sit on the sidelines and just absorb and follow, or you can be very active. And I see Sanghas that are very active. You know, members are doing things. They're doing practices together. There is a sense of community there. And the more involved you are, you know, the better off it is for everybody. It's better for the Sangha, and it's also better for you. And I think if you get involved enough and you find a group, and you know, even our group here, we kind of like have this Sangha with Nalanda. We've got, you know, I forget, I think it was near 13,000 friends. And I consider them all part of, you know, our organization, because they've taken the time to like the page and comment on the page. And we listen. We listen and follow. And, you know, I think that if you have a very healthy relationship with Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, your teacher, the teachings, and, you know, your group of practitioners, it makes things much, I don't want to say easier, but much more fulfilling and rich. That's been my experience that I can share. So now we need to get to the 5 precepts. And before we do this, there was something I wanted to mention about the Eightfold Path. And it's similar with the 5 precepts are part of it too. The Buddha was very, very clear when he taught the Eightfold Path and was talking about the 5 precepts, is that every Buddha before him taught these. You know, some people have this misconception that the only Buddha has been Sakyamuni Buddha. That's the Buddha, the present Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. He wasn't. There was many Buddhas before him. And there will be another Buddha after him. Now, does that mean that there are no other enlightened beings in between? No, not at all. Theravada might kind of think that to a degree, but no. The thing about Buddha Sakyamuni and the other Buddhas and the Buddhas before, next Buddhas, is that they figured this all out on their own. You know, they might have taken a teaching or two, but the bottom line is nobody had, you know, figured this out until Sakyamuni did it. The one before him, Kalpas. We will talk about time and cosmology very soon. in one of our discussions, but it is a very, 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 very long time. And that was the Buddha before. And the next Buddha, Maitreya, will come at a point in time where Buddhism is not even around anymore. So he's going to discover all of this again. And I think the thing which you have to, when you look at enlightened beings today, there are people that are enlightened beings. I believe, he'll never admit it, but I believe His Holiness the Dalai Lama is an enlightened being. And people, they're enlightened, but they're enlightened because they have Dharma already. There are people, I think Thich Nhat Hanh is an enlightened being, and I think, you don't just have to be in one tradition. Aja Khan, I love some of the stuff that I've heard him say. So there are enlightened beings, but they have help now. It's only Buddhas that they do it all on their own. But the 5 precepts, what's really important about these is that you don't take these as commandments, and you don't start to look at abstain as the first thing. Way too often it starts with I abstain. The true way it was said, taught, and translated, I undertake the training rule to abstain. And what the difference of that, why it might be just a bit subtle, is that you're training your mind to understand these precepts. And that's why His Holiness the Dalai Lama says you need to really know them so you'll know when to break them. And it's not that you delight in that you're going to have a specific point in time that you get to break these, but you need to know them inside and out. And once again, there is nothing is permanent. So these are not permanent, but you train the mind to understand them. And they become, it's kind of like living versus being stagnant. These are always, like everything else, these are in flux. But the 5 precepts are undertake the training rule to abstain from taking life, to abstain from stealing, sexual misconduct, training rule to abstain from false speech, intoxicating drinks, and heedlessness. And the Buddha made some commentary about these. And the first is, undertake the training rule to abstain from taking life. And that's, pretty straightforward. And, we were talking about as your practice, grows, you might be doing things, where you do work in meat industries or something, and you decide, no, I can't do that anymore. But, that's pretty straightforward. The Buddha said there is a case where a certain person abandoning the taking of life abstains from the taking of life. He dwells with his rod laid down, his knife laid down, scrupulous, merciful, compassionate for the welfare of all beings. And I think a key is there, again, is the case where a certain person, we don't judge other people for what they do. It's not, that's just so un-Buddhist and un-Dharma that, you don't start saying, well, this person's doing this, so that's, you don't know, especially when you start to understand emptiness a little better, then you don't know anything about what another person is doing. But that's the first precept. The second precept, I undertake the training rule to abstain from stealing. The Buddha says, abandoning the task of what is not given, he abstains from taking what is not given. He does not take in the manner of a thief things in a village or wilderness that belongs to others and have not been given by them. And that's a pretty straightforward too. But a lot of times with these precepts, I found it very insightful if you look at them literally, but also figuratively. And, I don't think that, when you talk about killing, what do you kill? What dreams have you killed of your own out of fear or ignorance or, whatever, why you killed something, or what, dreams or jobs did you kill for other people? Thoughts play a big role because we're talking about motivation. It's been throughout all of this. It's weaved into everything about Dharma as motivation. So, look at why you might have said or did certain things like that. I mean, what have you stolen from other people? Ideas. It's not just about the money, but look at what, you've taken that hasn't belonged to you. And you can find, a myriad of things that might be. Maybe it's nothing, but, it's something to think about. The third precept is something we've got to spend some time talking about. I undertake the training rule to abstain from sexual misconduct. And this is extremely important because this is the one and only thing the Buddha ever said about sex and sexual misconduct. Abandoning sexual misconduct, he abstains from sexual misconduct, sensual misconduct. He does not get sexually involved with those who are protected by their mothers, their fathers, their brothers, their sisters, their relatives, or their dharma, those with husbands, those who entail punishment, or even those crowned by flowers by another man. Some people have mistakenly thought crowned by flowers with another man meant about gay people. No. But we're going to talk about LGBT and dharma. Gay and lesbians, there's been some issues. But what the Buddha is actually talking about is, it's very, very straightforward. You don't have sex with somebody that is coupled with somebody, engaged, or married to somebody. You don't do it. And the other you don't do that, and then if you are married, engaged, or taken by somebody, you don't have sex with anybody else. But he's basically talking a lot about here is fidelity. When he's talking about mothers, fathers, and brothers, what he's talking about is you do not have sex with children. You find people that are emotionally stable to have these types of relationships. And the other thing is you don't punish people sexually. I think this is not that much of an issue for, well, it is an issue because there's a lot of people. I was watching something the other day about the sex trade industry in this country, and I had no idea it was to the degree that it is. But the problem has been, and I've gotten a lot of questions about this, and after when we did this discussion, and we had part of this last Saturday, I've decided that we probably are going to host an evening where we talk about not just sexual misconduct, but I think it's much more important to develop your sexual ethics, which will change a lot as your practice changes. But there has been some issues with homosexuality and parts of Dharma, certain sects and traditions. The Theravada, there was a lot of really hateful things said about gay men when the AIDS crisis hit. And it hit Thailand especially hard, and those monks were very angry. Where there's human beings, there's going to be miscommunications and mishaps and flaws. But the one that the Tibetan tradition has changed a great deal. There's a lot of evolution, but that's been somewhat recent. And this happened before the first incidents that really were out of line were some Chinese and Japanese sects in the 1200s, mid-1200s, early 1300s, where they used young monks, older monks used, male monks, young monks as their sexual concubines. I mean, it was to the point that Christian missionaries that went to both countries, they were appalled with what they saw. And the word got around, and in late 1300s, there was a very amazing teacher, and he is a huge figure in Tibetan Buddhism, is Geshe. Geshe founded the Gelugpa sect, which there's 4 sects in Tibetan Buddhism, which someday we'll talk about. But His Holiness the Dalai Lama belongs to the Gelugpa sect. And Geshe started to get very specific about sexual misconduct. And he didn't have anything really to say about, lesbians. He said the only thing he said about lesbians is women shouldn't share bedclothes, which basically means you shouldn't share a blanket. But he had a lot of things about no anal sex, no oral sex, no masturbation. And he was really kind of all over the place in other ways too. He had no problems if you have, if you're a man, you wanted a prostitute as long as you paid for it. You couldn't let anybody else pay for it. It was all over the place. And the reason it was all over the place, and the truth of what the issue really was, is that some people say it's the Tibetan culture. It's not the Tibetan culture. They have their own flavor of polygamy there. I think it's called polydormy. I don't understand the word, so it's not right. But what it means is that two men are married to one woman. That was very, very common in Tibet. And I'm not saying that there was homosexual relationships in there. That's not the point is that it was not part of Tibetan culture to have any issues with gay people. That wasn't the issue. But what was the issue is you have Geshe Kappa, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, that started his monastic life at age 6. And that's all, both of these two had ever been around. It was all male monastic societies. And anytime you have all male monastic or all male anything in an enclosed environment where there's no outside sexual, there's no place else to have sex, so it's all inside. You're going to have homosexuality. And Geshe Kappa really nailed and got extremely specific about gay men, and it was basically because he didn't want to have this continually going on in Tibetan monasteries. So he really overdid the part about no sex between gay men. And this is pretty much the norm. I mean, he wasn't the only one. Vasubandhu, the Indian teacher, he had a few things to say about it, but nothing like Geshe Kappa. And in the early 80s, His Holiness the Dalai Lama said some things that, he said there's nothing wrong with homosexuality, but it's just not the best thing for a Buddhist. And that caused some really hurt feelings, especially in San Francisco. And you've got to give His Holiness credit. He went to them. They didn't have to come find him because he didn't like to see people suffering and hurt. And he explained to them about how he was raised, how he was, taught, and what the teachings say. And, you've got to also understand that the Dalai Lama was not a very worldly person during this time. This was before, I think, right before he won the Nobel Peace Prize, or might have been a little bit after. I'm not quite sure of it. But he had this meeting, and he heard and he listened, and he a lot of people think the Dalai Lama can make changes to all of Buddhism. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has any sway, per se, with the Tibetan sects. And what he suggested that someday, at some point in time, what needed to be is the convening of the council. And that started, when we will talk about the next convening of the council, because that brought the Mahayana. But what has to happen in this situation would be leaders, elders of all sects and traditions are going to have a meeting, and they talk about homosexuality, and the Dalai Lama also wanted to talk about the way women were treated. And he said that it's time that we have these types of discussions. And that's kind of where it ended there. And I don't think it has anything to do with the Dalai Lama not wanting to do it, but to get every one of these sex traditions, as numerous as they are, all together, and get them to focus on two issues, I think would be next to impossible. And how this has evolved in the Tibetan tradition is that the majority of all the teachers under 60, they don't want to have any ill will about any of this. They see nothing wrong as long as your relationships are, follow this, that you're not cheating or, not playing around with young kids. You're doing, you're following the fifth precept. It just means with another person of the same sex. And, there have been some recent things. Dzogchen Panel Rinpoche, I've talked with him about this, and he did a wonderful evening with gay men in New York. It's recorded. And Kalu Rinpoche, the new incarnation of Kalu Rinpoche, he has talked very positive about the gay and lesbian community. And the other thing about it that I'd like to just kind of mention too is that, karma is not permanent. We've talked a lot about that. And the karmic consequences for certain things have evolved too. I mean, if you were born gay in the 1950s, your karma would be different than if you were born gay today. Now, that doesn't mean that it was okay to be mean or vicious or hurt gay people in the 50s. That's not what it means. But it means the karmic consequences, consequences is a really bad word. The karmic predisposition has changed, and that's due to compassion. So, you know, we talk about how bad a lot of things are in life, but there's a lot of evolution due to just compassion. And, you know, I think within the next 5 years, the stigma of homosexuality will be very, very small. You know, it's amazing how fast things have changed. But then it's a good thing that this has gotten kind of sorted with the Tibetan tradition, because the amount of LGBT people that are interested in getting involved in Buddhism is quite remarkable and staggering. It's something that is very appealing. I mean, it was part of my, you know, development is, I think Einstein was a big fan, and judgment, you know, you just don't judge. That's kind of one of the few golden rules. So I think we will do an evening about the third precept, because it is important. And I'd like to go into more detail of what some of the things Vasubandhu said and Ashanoga, and also talk about, you know, sexual ethics. When I was talking to my teacher here, you know, I said, I think that the whole thing about sexual misconduct is, in some ways, it should be nothing more but a stage to, you know, for you to develop your sexual ethics. And that's really important to do. You know, with my practice, what I'm saying is, as, you know, you grow and your practice grows, some things are going to change. And there are certain suggestions. They're not rules, and you don't get thrown out. But if you've taken certain tantric practices and initiations for those practices, you agree to limit some of your sexual escapades, so to speak. And it doesn't mean that you never have sex, you know. That's not the deal. A lot of people talk to me about Tantra. They can't wait to find out about Tantric sex. Tantric sex is part of the Tibetan tradition or the Vajrayana tradition, but it's not all what most people think it is, because, you know, you fail if you have an orgasm. So these people that have a little kind of misconception about Tantra. But I think we'll talk about that and have some, it'll be, I think, a very good discussion. So that's the third. The fourth precept, and it was, I reminded you to keep track of when we were talking about the Eightfold Path, that we were going to revisit this. And so I undertake the training rule to abstain from false speech. And what he's basically saying here, this is, you can read it. What the Buddha is very clearly saying is, it doesn't matter where you are, if you're with your relatives, with your, you know, a town, a group, big, you know, in front of big shots, kings, whatever, you just don't lie. You know, you don't, you just, it's as clear cut is, you know, you don't lie. You don't claim something that you don't know. And when we talked about ignorance, one of the things that separates bewilderment and ignorance and delusion is, you know, you become bewildered and then you get delusional that you'll just make something up to fit whatever you're saying. And that kind of falls into this too. So you don't, you know, you don't lie. And the final precept is, I undertake the training rule to abstain from intoxicating drinks and drugs causing heedlessness. And the Buddha gave no commentary on this. And I think the reason is that you know, the drugs causing heedlessness, that was added. That, I got to tell you, that was the drugs causing heedlessness, was not, drugs wasn't used in there. But it's also interesting because the Buddha talked about intoxicating, you know, anything that's intoxicating is bad, whether it be sex, you know, gambling, ravioli, anything that you're obsessed with, intoxicated with. It can cause you, it causes heedlessness. You know, you become so focused. You're talking about being mindful in places. Well, you become mindful on the wrong things, and you become intoxicated with them. And that causes problems. You know, whether it be good or bad, to be intoxicated with anything is not good for you. And the thing about these 5 precepts now that I'd like to talk a little bit about is that when we were talking about the Eightfold Path. As you progress with it, it synergistically going in a good direction. When you start playing with the precepts and not paying attention to them, a lot of things can go from one into the other. You know, there's a story, a Tibetan story, where this novice Lama, he went out, finally finished his 3-year retreat, and he was out and about, and this woman she was kind of like the village vixen. She, he was begging, and she made him something to eat, and she said, "I'm not going to let you go until you break a precept." And he thought, well, I can maybe break one. So he decided, he was thinking, which one of these precepts should I break? And he decided to drink beer. We call it chung in Tibetan. And he drank a lot of beer. And the next thing he remembers is he woke up in bed with the woman, and he killed her goat. And then when he got back to the monastery, he had to lie about where he'd been. And the point about this is one you can cause another to another to another. And the other thing I think it's important to be mindful of is how we can use certain of these, to facilitate another one. I mean, most of us at some point in time in our life met somebody we really liked, that we weren't sure how they felt about us. We told them a lot of lies, and we went and got them drunk, hoping we could have sex with them. So you can see right there that you played around with, several of them. Anytime you use one of these precepts to hurt somebody, that's a bad situation. That's, I think, about what we should have covered here on this part. And now we need to talk a little bit about what the Buddha said about following these 5 precepts. It's one of the few times the Buddha gave specific instructions about something being a gift. And he says if you follow these 5 precepts, the Buddha promised. In doing so, he gives freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings. In giving freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings, he gains a share of limitless freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, and freedom from oppression. This is the first gift, the first great gift, original, long-standing, traditional, ancient, unadulterated from the beginning, that is not open to suspicion and will never be open to suspicion, and is unfaulted by knowledgeable, contemplative, and priests. And what the Buddha's telling you is that the more you train with these precepts and the more you can weave them into the tapestry of your life, the better off you're going to be. It's going to eliminate a great deal of problems. I mean, none of us are perfect, and we've all broken precepts. I think all of us have, at one time, have broken one or the other. You might have just stepped on an ant or something, but it's something that you've got to train to be mindful of. And the more you can make it into your life, the easier and simpler your life is going to be. What it's really talking about is that you are content. That's a very big thing for Buddhists, is to learn to be content. And that's something society doesn't really want us to be in this day and age, is content. But so this is the gift the Buddha said training in the precepts will bring. And so let's go to, the Dalai Lama, what he was talking about when to break a precept. This doesn't mean that you are anxious for a moment before you get to break one. It's kind of like, I'm going to look to see, oh, this might be a good time for this. If you're just trying to do something to get away with it, that's, delusional thinking. But there is a point in time that each one of these can and should be broken. Now, killing. You can think about, if somebody's trying to kill you or, that type of situation. What the Buddha said when he was talking about this, and the Buddha could recall all of his lifetimes. He recalled even his lifetime as a butterfly, very clearly. But he talked about a lifetime he had as a seaman. And he was on this ship, and there was a madman, and he was, had a machete and was killing people. And the Buddha saw that he could knock that man out of the boat. And it would be a certain death because the sea was very rough and there'd be nobody there to help him. And Buddha did that. He knocked him off the side of the boat, and he went to the ocean and he drowned. And one of his disciples said, well, that's great that you saved all of those people from, anybody else getting hurt. And Buddha said, no, that's not the reason I did it. He said, I didn't want that man to have any more bad karma stacked up. That's the reason he knocked the man into the water and drowned. And he died. He didn't want him to, generate any more bad karma. Which I thought was a very interesting way of looking at things. Sometimes we need to look at how we view villains and how we view people that we want to see vengeance upon. This is in the news a lot, and it's somewhat troubling that so many people think that vengeance is going to solve anything. Vengeance never has and never will solve anything at all. It just brings nothing but misery. So, not stealing. When would be an appropriate time to steal? For me, if you are a parent and your child and you are starving, and you might have asked this guy if you could have something, and he's said no, but you see in the middle of the night you can get milk or something, and you do that. Is it perfect? No, but you don't need to die over milk. Something like that. I think we can all think of something if we were struggling and there was no other choice. The only thing you should never, ever do is steal from the Sangha. Don't ever steal from the Sangha. Don't take anything there that you should not take. The karmic consequences for doing that, from what I understand, could be, far from ideal. Now, sexual misconduct, I was stumped with this for a long time because I believe a great deal in fidelity and monogamy. And I was thinking, and there was one fairly prominent Tibetan teacher who's had his own issues with this, it seems, but he said that, it could be possible if somebody was too attached to his wife or his girlfriend and you just needed to shock him out of it, and I didn't buy that. You don't have to buy everything. I didn't buy that. But I was thinking about some things I've seen recently, and it's a very touching story about a woman who was dying of cancer, and she was very, very much impressed with this woman that was like this nurse, end of care, was taking care of her, and she saw how wonderful her husband and her got along. And she really encouraged them to develop their relationship, before she left, because she was concerned and she felt that those two together would be very good. And they did develop a relationship, and she did die, and they're still together. And they've talked about it. There's also been a case where, what if your spouse was in a coma? And might it be There's people, today they've been in a coma for 30 years. I know one case, and it's been at least 30 years she's been in a coma. Person might not want to officially divorce, but that doesn't mean that they might not want to have some type of relationship. It's not up to any of us to judge. It's for everybody to do what they think is going to work best for them. And, some people might find that offensive, but I think that, nobody's being harmed. That's the important thing about all of these, is that you don't want to harm anybody. That's the key to the 5 precepts. And you hear this a lot in Dharma talk, is if nothing else, don't harm. You don't have to do anything positive, just don't harm. So the other is false speech, and I think that we can all think of, you don't want to lie to, get out of trouble or something per se, but I mean, if you were, in Nazi Germany, and you were hiding some Jews, and the Germans knocked on your door and said, do you have any Jews? Is there anybody, have you seen any? And you say, no, I haven't. Well, you're not telling the truth, but, if you would say, yeah, they're here, well, they will probably be, killed, and you might have a hand in that then. It's the responsibility, we all take, but there is a time that I think it would be mindful to not necessarily be 100% truthful. Intoxicated. When would be a good time to be intoxicated? All I know is if I ever have surgery, I hope I'm intoxicated, because I don't want to feel anything like that. So, those are the 5 precepts. And the thing is that when you take refuge, you declare that you are going to try your best to follow these 5 precepts. That's why they were put in. You get introduced to the 5 precepts once you do take refuge. I don't know if I made that point clear in the part of this talk. This has been an interesting talk. As I told you, we were redoing it because we had some technical difficulties. And this is the first time I've done a talk like this to myself. So it's been a little interesting for me because I usually am asking questions and getting some feedback from people that are here. So this is a bit different, but I hope it's been something that you have enjoyed and got something out of. We really enjoy doing this and offering some bit of tidbit of, what we hope can help you. And I'd like to thank you. And, I always have to be the one that talks about money. As what we're trying to do with our social programs it's a big undertaking. And we don't expect these classes to pay for it by any stretch of the imagination, but it helps. And, there is a thing, and I'll explain it to you as it's been explained to me, that when you give with an altruistic heart, it doesn't matter what you give, but if you are giving with an altruistic, a good heart, and you're doing it to cause benefit for others, not just yourself, the merit you create in that is vast, is very, very good. If you give just because you're hoping for karmic brownie points, you get a little something, but it's nothing like if you develop altruism. And many of us have to, they say fake it till you make it. It takes some time for some of us to be more altruistic. Altruism is like an art. We can all become altruistic, but it's sometimes a little bit easier for some than others. And, the other thing about when we were talking about the responsibility and the wonder and amazement of sharing Dharma, that's what we do too. And we appreciate any generosity you show us. And since I'm not being able to speak with you, please, if you're not a friend, go to the Nalanda page on Facebook. Just put Nalanda LGBT and you'll come to our Facebook page. And feel free to ask me a question if you have any questions about that. Or, you can send me a personal email at Scott, SCOTT, at nalandalgbt.org. And I thank you for letting me ramble for a little bit here. I hope that we did follow sequences as it was laid out. But like I said, it's very interesting to teach a class to yourself. But I hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to see you at our next class. Okay.